You sit here and say, all we need to do is do this much more to make it to the Super Bowl, you're wrong. You got to start over. I mean, yes, you carry a lot of things forward, but every year you got to start over. Listen, I can start off saying we've got to be able to run the football better.
Your last game, if you make the playoffs, generally will tell you where you're short, if you don't win at all. And I think, maybe a little bit more balance of the run game. And I'm not talking, when I say balance, I'm not saying run it 20 times, throw it 20 times. I'm just saying the ability to run it when you have to. I think it's unfair to look at the running backs to point blame on the running game. I think running the football is very complex. If one guy doesn't make his block, the play's probably dead. And so there were times this year where we're one guy away, and whether it was a tight end, whether it was a lineman, and it's a big gainer, and you're going, gosh, if we just get this guy blocked, and we had that at times. And I'm not saying there's no blame. Sometimes the running back missed the hole, but it's one of those things you got to practice it, you got to emphasize it, you got to work on it, and that's something that we'll definitely look at. But I'm not looking at Devin Singletary and Zack Moss thinking those guys came up short for us.
I share the same opinion as General Manager Brandon Beane, that the running backs weren't the main issue with the run game. As I said in our run game film breakdown, I believe the issues were primarily up front.
I think 60% of the issues in the run game were the guys up front. And we talked about all the reasons behind that. I think it's 60% offensive line. I think it's 20% the running backs, as you saw some of those reads. And then the last 20%, I would say, is the coaching, is the scheme, is the play calling and play design.
In that video, we broke down the issues with the offensive line, how the constant shuffling of personnel created by the staff and injuries forced the staff to tweak their scheme, and how it affected the overall running game product. Today, we are going to focus on the two primary running backs on the Bills, Devin Singletary and Zack Moss. Two guys who, I believe, generally speaking, are more similar than different. They aren't complete backs. They aren't guys that are athletic freaks that can carry the run or pass game. Just solid, efficient backs, both drafted in the 3rd round. Backs with specific traits that fill roles in the Bills' running back by committee approach. So I'm going to be splitting hairs for most of this video, analyzing the smallest of details, such as how each runner's vision differs by run concept, how they set up blocks, make people miss, catch the ball, and my favorite, how well they pass block. So to start, the Bills shifted from a gap scheme to more of a zone scheme in 2020. That's a change in an entire philosophy. Gap or man schemes are more centered around power and moving guys against their will. Zone schemes, on the other hand, use athleticism and angles to challenge a defensive front. It's more about winning with leverage than will. Motor's skill set has translated the best in gap schemes that have at least one pulling offensive lineman. His patience and red light green light agility consistently put him in a position to succeed. On these gap runs such as power, counter tray, then hybrid concepts such as pin and pull and fold schemes, the blocking generates a tad more space to operate, and it will give Motor the ability to use the pulling lineman to set up a block or to gain positional leverage to beat the scraping defenders. It's why he's been the Bills' most explosive back over the last 2 years.
Since he entered the league, Singletary has had a knack for getting to the second level to produce chunk plays in the run game. Out of his 156 attempts last year, 21 of them went for 10 or more yards. That was good for the 11th highest rate among running backs with at least 100 carries. In his rookie season, about 1 out of every 6 attempts gained 10 or more yards, which was second best in the NFL. Looking at Moss last year, only 1 out of 10 rushes was for 10 or more yards, ranking him in the middle of the pack.
If you break it down even further, you'll discover that Motor registered a 10-plus yard run 17.3% of the time when he had pulling linemen, as opposed to Moss, who managed only 6.5%. And that's because Moss doesn't quite have the patience that Motor does. He's more of a downhill runner, as we will break down later. His spatial awareness isn't as special as Singletary's, and he doesn't manipulate defenders to get them blocked up as well, which leads to him only gaining 4 yards per attempt on gap runs, as opposed to Motor's 4.9. Here's a pin and pull run where Moss doesn't let the play develop long enough. Instead of following Mitch Morse and Quentin Spain out wide, he sees an opening back inside. And he's not wrong. There's a huge cutback lane, and he's the type of back to take green when he sees it. But that green is minimized by Christian Wilkins and the unblocked linebacker Jerome Baker. Singletary thrived on these concepts in 2019, and going away from them in 2020 minimized his impact. Watch how he's patient, attacks the line of scrimmage, but doesn't take the first daylight like Moss. He stabs inside to buy time for his blockers to get out in front to lead the way to an explosive run. With zone blocking becoming the predominant run scheme, the staff had to mix in some runs that were more hybrids, like the pin and pull for motor, to make an impact. These fold schemes are a combination of gap and zone, where there technically is a down block and puller, like the concepts we broke down. The Bills like to use ace fold schemes. That's generally a down block by the guard and pull by the center, maximizing the linemen as pullers and motor's ability to patiently navigate through traffic, set up blocks, and find daylight. It's something the Bills need to do even more in 2021 because it marries very well with their play action and run pass option game. The shift to more of an outside zone scheme was a proverbial hot hand or concept that was working the best, as per Brandon Bean.
Just every year is kind of a new year, and you kind of get in a groove of what's working, what's not.
But I think in many ways it limited what motor could do, similar to when the Bills tried making LaShawn McCoy an outside zone runner in Rick Dennison's run scheme. Outside zone runs are meant to get all the gaps moving horizontally, thereby testing the gap integrity of every run-fit defender. The aim is then to hope for at least one defender to get out of their gap or get out leveraged, and for the running back to hit the hole. So there are far more options for running backs. The play can hit front side or back side, but the timing of the running back's decision has to be on schedule with the blocking up front. The discipline or lack thereof by the defense truly determines where the ball is going to hit. So while it gives the offense more options to be right, it limits creative runners like Motor and even Shady. That's because Motor is at his best when he's able to set up blocks and get out in space. Contrary to belief, outside zone runs are meant to hit inside. Very rarely do they hit out wide. They are designed for quick reads and one-cut downhill runners like Moss. Decisions on whether to bounce, bang, or bend are typically taught to be made by the third step. Once the decision is made, you are taught to simply take what you can get. Slow reads and hesitating are frowned upon. It doesn't matter if you are the MVP of the league, the godfather of the wide zone run will let you know you messed up.
The left guard forced the runner to run where he wanted, and I don't like the runner's pause. Okay, now this is MVP in the league, and I promise you, when he came off that field, I ripped his nuts because he cannot wait that long to make that cut. I can't block him long enough for that to happen.
You see Motor open and aim for the tight end. The back is taught to stay on that track until he makes the decision on where to cut. But Singletary often manipulates his track to set up blocks, almost trying to stay a step ahead. But this can cause him to make the decision too soon and then try to overcompensate by bouncing it late. That just doesn't fly. If he had stayed on track, it would have been an easy bounce call. I think the shift in outside zone runs the final 3 quarters of the season had a lot to do with the blocking by the offensive line and tight ends, along with the efficiency shown by the running backs. But I would say Moss was better in this concept because he showed more discipline when it comes to the aiming points, tracks, and reads. He's well versed in zone runs thanks to his time at Utah. Those reps allowed his skill set to transfer very quickly at the next level. On zone runs in 2020, Moss averaged 4.8 yards per attempt, with Motor averaging 4.3. Not a statistically significant difference, but both backs were much more effective when there weren't any pullers. Moss's one-cut demeanor would make Alex Gibbs proud. He routinely makes his decision to bounce, bang, or bend on schedule, so he has enough speed to win the edge, but also the size and physicality to take the run up inside, just like it's designed. And when he makes the cut downhill, that is when defenders are forced to make business decisions. The final reason I believe the Bills leaned on Moss and the zone run game was because it gave Allen a lot more leeway at the line of scrimmage. Gap runs have a much more complex set of rules and checks at the line of scrimmage based on what front the defense is showing. Zone schemes only have a few calls at the line of scrimmage because generally the footwork is the same and it's just a series of combination or solo blocks. This means much like when Allen is at the line of scrimmage changing calls in the passing game, in the run game, he will have the option to run outside zone strong or weak depending on the front he sees, with very few changes needed by the offensive line up front. The run checks are much more streamlined, making it easier to rep in practice. This is important because they are a pass-first team, so most of their practice time is spent teaching and repping the passing game and its complexities. Moss's consistency in this scheme allowed him to be a threat frontside and backside, which helped the Bills close out games later in the season against the Steelers, Broncos, and Patriots. But Motor was still the more explosive runner. He edged out Moss on runs over 10 yards in zone concepts, 11.7% to 11.4. Alright, let's dive into the passing game, an area I think you will start to see the differences between the two backs and likely the reasoning for Moss getting the lion's share of the snaps the back half of last season. Motor was targeted more as a receiver in the Bills' high-flying attack, leading with 49 targets to Moss's 18. But 88% of Singletary's targets and 89% of Moss's targets were no deeper than 5 yards past the line of scrimmage. Their routes were generally Texas routes, diagonal routes to the flats, or checkdowns. When the Bills wanted to pass, they preferred to go to the array of receivers at their disposal. Motor seems to run crisper routes and can do more after the catch when aligned out wide than Moss can, but I believe Moss actually adjusts to throws and has better hands overall. These traits are important when you think about the routes they are running. Usually they are quick hitters to the flats or over the middle with them running full speed and having to adjust to throws, all while putting their body in an advantageous position to make the first guy miss. Moss just really impressed me with his ability to consistently look the ball in, catch it with his hands, and put his body in a position to break the first tackle. Moss caught all 4 of his screen targets for 27 yards, but Singletary led in that department with 12 receptions on 17 targets for 94 yards. But Singletary also pitched in 4 drops on screen plays alone, which was the second most behind Alvin Kamara, and Kamara had twice as many targets. Since entering the league, Motor has dropped 6 screens per Sports Info Solutions. It seems like Allen and Motor have trouble connecting, especially on screens. Sometimes Allen throws it too hot or a tad high, just out of the reach of Motor's short catch radius. Either way, it's odd to see. But where I believe we see the biggest difference between the 2 running backs is in pass blocking. While this is an area that Motor improved in, Moss as a rookie stepped in and quickly showed that he could be one of the best pass blocking running backs.
Moss's effectiveness in pass protection was a big part of what got him on the field in 2020. Looking at running backs with at least 15 snaps in true pass protection, he ranked number 1 in pass blocking efficiency. He was the only player in this group to not give up a single pressure. He allowed no sacks, hits, or hurries, and had no penalties called against him. In true pass sets, Pro Football Focus had him as their highest graded blocker for all running backs last year. When he was in the game, he was used as a blocker for 32% of pass plays, which was 3rd in the NFL. Singletary was used more as a receiver out of the backfield, as he stayed in to block on just 17% of his snaps. On the other hand, Singletary drew 3 flags when in pass protection, which was the most for all running backs. This is a big reason why in passing situations, Moss stayed in to protect.
Motor had some very good reps in pass protection in 2020. Whether he was sliding across the formation to pick up a rusher, responsible for an interior gap, or assigned scan protection, he generally knew who to pick up. But there are just some things physically that Motor can't quite do like the bigger, stronger back end Moss can. At times, Motor is a tad late to fit up the rusher, but he consistently struggles at one thing, and that's anchoring against power. Watch the exact same rusher against both backs here. Motor gets dropped like a bad habit in the A-gap, forcing Allen off the spot and an incompletion. Moss, on the other hand, lets Allen sort out the protection, locks onto his assignment, and stones the rusher in the A-gap. Moss possesses the strength and power to hold in pass protection against anyone the defense sends at him. Linebackers like Jerome Baker, defensive ends like Joey Bosa, corners like Terrence Brooks, and even safeties like Jamal Adams or Quandre Diggs. And while his physical traits allowed him to withstand the multitude of rushers that were sent at Allen, what was amazing to see was his recognition. The Bills routinely saw rushers sent from the linebacker and secondary level. Recognizing those blitzers is a team effort. Either the center or quarterback have to recognize it, set the protection so that these guys are accounted for, but more times than not, it's the running back who is responsible for those rushers. The rookie routinely shut those guys down. Here's a 3rd down situation with the Jets sending Brian Poole on a rush from the field. The Jets have several defenders up near the line of scrimmage, showing some sort of pressure. The Bills appear to set 5-0 blocking with the 5 offensive linemen set to block the 4 defenders on the line of scrimmage, along with the linebacker Neville Hewitt. That means Moss is responsible for the 6th rusher if the Jets send one. The Jets only send 5, but that 5th rusher is Poole coming from the slot. Moss scans inside out, then meets Poole at the line of scrimmage. This allows Allen to extend the play with his legs and pick up the 1st down. Check out this post-snap processing by Moss. Prior to the snap, just about everyone on the Bills offense believes a slot blitz is coming. They see safety Budda Baker capping the slot corner Byron Murphy, which generally means Murphy is blitzing. But post-snap, it's Baker and inside linebacker Jordan Hicks that rush the quarterback, but it's picked up flawlessly. Let's look at it from the end zone angle. Sending Murphy from the slot was obviously the plan in this game as they sent him 14 times. The Bills did a great job of routinely picking him up. You see Allen set the protection, then John Feliciano communicate to the right side of the line how they are going to block up the possible blitz. Watch the helmets of right guard Brian Winters and right tackle Darrell Williams. They're looking out wide to pick up the pressure coming off of the edge. Post-snap, Winters takes a spiking edge rusher Hassan Reddick. Moss and Williams have their eyes set on the slot corner, but of course Murphy doesn't show. Williams then sets his eyes on Baker, and that's when Moss realizes that because he stayed in to block, Hicks is green dog blitzing, so he has to pick him up. Look at how quickly he slides to his left to square up Hicks, absorbs the blow, and anchors against a linebacker who is at full speed. His pass blocking recognition paired with his ability to execute the blocks were not rookie-like. They were that of a player who had been in the league for 10 years. Moss's dependability as a pass blocker were incredibly crucial to the Bills' pass-happy offense. It allowed Elam to push the ball downfield or extend plays. But I think that the Bills' pass-first approach was part of the reason why the Bills' run game appeared to struggle so much. But were those struggles valid? Or as Bills fans, were we just so used to being a run-first team, where a lot of the memorable plays came via the run game the last few years? Having a dominant passing game takes a lot of work, a lot of practice, and therefore a lot of practice time. More time during the week is geared towards executing the portion of the playbook that dominates on Sundays, which is the passing game. So the run game portion of the playbook has to be efficient and effective. It has to supplement the situations that arise in the game, and the value of those situations versus others may be different than a run-first approach. Motor and Moss aren't backs that are going to wow you with their speed, athleticism, or ability to play above the scheme routinely, but they are guys that can be effective if schemed correctly. I think the staff will focus on tweaking the scheme to fit the players better in 2021. Plays will be blocked up better and will allow Motor and Moss to play to the expectations that we put on them heading into last season.